All right, so thanks for sticking with this session. My name is Mauro Cherubini. I will be presenting this work that I did in collaboration with, this is actually, in fact, joint work between the University of Lausanne and the University of Michigan, with colleague Professor Dillahundt and Johei Ixiao. What we did was that the study was originally conducted in the US, and we did like a replication study here in Switzerland. So it's exactly the same tools that have been tested, the exact same setup, but two different countries, okay? So I'd like to start by providing a little bit of context of the work and the motivation why we started doing this. And the initial point that brought us interested in the topic is that technology has transformed the world of work and led to market changes. And although not in every country, but stable employment opportunities are decreasing. And obviously today also we have been talking about like changes also in the recruitment process that could potentially kick off in a number of years that will even sparkle more the situation. And this is particularly problematic and we think for undeserved population. So if we think about like ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and low-resourced job seekers in general. Particularly because perhaps some of the algorithms we have been discussing here today might not be able to differentiate and take into account these personal differences. So being unemployed in general is a period of life that is typically associated with physical problems, stress, depressions. In some extreme cases, it can even lead to suicide. And aside from the financial constraints that people face in this situation, losing a job means also that you lose your daily routines, contacts with colleagues, might also be friends, and in general, just a sense of purpose that was provided basically by completing the daily tasks at work. So in this research, we built on HCI literature, human-computer interaction literature, to explore how digital employment tools can support job seekers. HCI work has conceptualized a number of tools that could support the needs of disadvantaged job seekers. And most of these works focus on self-efficacy as one of the key concepts that we need to control. Self-efficacy is defined as the individual internal belief about his or her ability to perform a task. Okay, so in this case, it will be getting basically a new job. Self-efficacy is a key predictor of performance. So people with a high self-efficacy show more commitment to reaching goals and find creative ways to reach these goals. Also, self-efficacy can lead to promising employment, and in the case of unemployment, actually having a high level of self-efficacy help cope with the downsides of being unemployed. And finally, interventions that increase job seekers' self-efficacies are typically associated with more perseverance in finding basically a new job. Unfortunately for us, basically this self-efficacy tends naturally to lower as the person spends more time being unemployed. So the more time the person spends in the unemployment period, the lower is sense of self-efficacy. So in our research, we built on behavioral psychology literature, and we applied in particularly Ajzen theory of planned behavior as a theoretical model to examine basically the design factors that influence job seekers' intention to search for jobs. So this theory basically, as we simplified a bit, and we focused on the three main constructs of the theory that are meant to influence the intention and the behavior to search for jobs. Self-efficacy, I have already introduced that. Subjective norms basically relates to the perceived amount of social pressure that we receive either from family, friends, or the community more in general, or the degree to which basically a person perceives social pressure basically to perform or not perform. And so basically this includes also the motivation to meet these expectations that other people have about us. And attitudes as a construct refers to the individual evaluation of how their job search behavior will eventually lead to getting a new job. So these three factors basically contribute to the job search intention that informs action, the willingness to perform a certain behavior, essentially getting a new job. So in this study, we evaluated two tools. One is called Interview App. It's very similar to what has been presented just in the previous session. It's a commercial tool that basically automates job interviews and help companies basically select the best talents for open position. We were interested in this tool not so much from the HR perspective, but more for the job seekers perspective, because it also allowed users indirectly to train for job interviews. Okay, so essentially it's a very simple interface. You have a number of questions. Typically they are displayed in batch of 5s. You have the question that gets displayed here, and then you just speak in front of the camera. You see yourself being recorded over here, and then when you are finished with the series of questions, you can move to the next question, and then when you are finished recording the answers to all of your questions, basically you can download the recording of your interview. And typically at that point, the application will send it or forward it to the HR or to whoever basically opened the position for a particular job. But in our case, basically we stopped there and we allowed basically the users to download and watch it again as many times as they liked. Or if they really wanted to, they could share the video with whoever basically they wanted to, their peers, their family, and eventually receive it feedback. Okay. The other tool that basically we called it Review CV, and it's an application that was developed originally by Professor Dillahunt in the University of Michigan, and we translated basically the UI in French for this particular study, given that it was replicated here in Lausanne. With this tool, basically users can upload their CV and they can receive feedbacks from experts. So you see the CV on the left-hand side. This is the specific post they are applying to. This is the title of the post. This is the job description. And then here you can see the feedback that is provided by an expert that actually goes through the questionnaire, reviews also the job position, and then for each subsection is going to provide a textual a score actually indicated by a number of stars from 1 to 5, and also a textual description of things that he or she basically think needs to be fixed or improved about that specific point. So one particular difference between these two tools that I wanted to highlight is that while Review CV had an external review process, namely with this expert I was talking about, the other tool, Interview App, was more designed to solicit an internal review process of what we called basically a self-reflection. Self-reflection is an active process of understanding experiences to learn from that you can use for your future. So in Interview App, users could share the video and get feedback from peers. However, while for Review CV, the sharing was necessary and it was automatic, in Interview App, this was totally optional to the user, and it had to be initiated by the user. Okay. So to understand how the two tools affected TPB factors over time, we conducted basically a 1-month randomized field experimentation. So in comparisons with the study you just saw previously, here basically the difference is that we give the tools to our participants and they could use it at their home whenever they wanted to, and if they don't want to, they could also don't use the tools. And then we were basically understanding what they thought at the end of the trial period. So basically we had like 3 parts in this experiment. So we started recruiting them and randomizing into groups. In the onboarding induction sections, basically, they had to fill like a survey. Then they received basically a tutorial to learn how to use the tool. And then we went into a semi-structured interviews. Then there was this period of 1 month where they were free to use it at their leisure. And we asked them basically to fill a diary during this time to understand whether it was used, whether it was useful, etc. And then basically at the end of the period, basically they were coming back, they were filling again a questionnaire, and they were we were going also through a semi-structured interviews. All right, so I'm going to skip the details of the participant recruitment. I will jump directly onto the results. So overall, the survey and the interview data suggests that the two tools positively affect the self-efficacy and subjective norms constructs of the TPB. But given that this study was mainly a qualitative research in nature, I'm not going to talk a lot in details about the numbers, but rather focus on the analysis of the results of the questionnaires and the interviews that we did as part of the research. So our survey results suggest that participant self-efficacy increased after 1 month across all groups. And consistent with the survey results, our interview results show that Review CV and Interview App both supported participant self-efficacy. However, they did it in different ways. Review CV participants' self-efficacy increased because they received positive external feedback from reviewers. While for Interview App, participants' self-efficacy increased as a result of self-assessment after reviewing their practice video. All of our participants had like positive changes also in their subjective norms or the perceived social support that they received throughout the period. We saw from our interview data that the participants in both groups saw the potential to improve their social support. So for Review CV, allowed users basically to connect with expert reviewers who could provide them with feedback. And Interview App also allowed users to share the mock interviews with peers. However, we found that only 4 out of the 15 participants in this condition did share their videos. And we will come back later on the reasons why we think this is the case. Participants also provided feedback on how to possibly improve the tools moving forward. Some of their comments also help us understand better the findings. For Review CV, participants were mainly concerned with the time it takes to receive the feedback. So for specific job applications, the usual time delay was 3 or 4 days, during which basically the reviewer was going through the CV and then providing feedback back to the job applicants. And in many cases, this was perceived as being like too much or too long of a process. An Interview App feedback also helped realize that the majority of participants sharing was indeed an issue. I mean, in most cases, they felt embarrassed to share their mock interviews videos, or in some cases, they say that they didn't have someone to share with. or they felt they didn't want people to know that they were unemployed. I mean, this is also something that came out quite vividly from the study, is that being unemployed is a social stigma. And so if you talk too openly, obviously you can be you can have like negative feedback about that. And so there wasn't like such openness for sharing and talking openly about their situation. So review CV, positive resume review feedback led to an increase of self-efficacy. Participants perceived the positive feedback they received from volunteers as a source of social support. And social support and reassurance of worth were found to be significant predictors of individual efficacy, basically from past research. So going forward, what research should investigate are additional techniques basically to provide positive job search feedback, and also a way in which we could possibly demonstrate social support to job seekers. Also, job seekers need feedback in other aspects of their jobs process. For instance, our participants talked about like their need to receive feedback about their self-presentation, or for instance, the cover letter that usually is sent with the CV, or for instance, their job search activity plannings in general. So they spoke about like almost having like a life coach that could help them, shape these different activities. Self-reflection is also another feature that our qualitative results suggests leads to an enhanced self-efficacy. We saw that in Interview App, where users began to self-reflect after reviewing their videos. They reflected on how they reacted to certain kind of questions, what they usually said, or more importantly, what they forgot to say according to specific questions. They also reflected on their posture, their gesture, their facial expression that they used during the interviews, which were all important aspects that they did realize by themselves being important in a job interview. After reflecting, some of the participants also explicitly asked for a formal training, basically, for job interviews. So they did realize that they needed help to improve their job interview skills. And reflection, therefore, is necessary for successful career identity development. So we think this is a very important outcome. Going forward, researchers should investigate ways in which, for employment interventions, to incorporate methods such as career narratives. Essentially, these techniques foster reflection and support people's ability to design their possible selves. So they don't think only in terms of their next employment, but also more long-term about what is to come and where they want to be in a number of years. Okay, so why am I presenting this at AMLD? I think that our results suggest that possibly automating parts of the workflow of these tools might provide added values for our users, for job seekers. So our participants recurrently spoke about like limitations of the current design of Review CV and Interview App that made us realize that replacing possibly the peer or the expert with a machine learning type of feedback could be seen as a plus rather than a minus. And in the next slide, I'm going to highlight 3 limitations of the current design that would warrant automated feedback. Okay? So first, participants in our study didn't want to wait days to receive feedback, as I mentioned. They described situations where they suddenly find like open position that fit their interests and profile, and they didn't want to wait an extra week to apply. They wanted to do it right away. So applications such as Review CV heavily rely on experts or volunteers to provide feedback, but this design doesn't scale up. And finding expert of review is not simple, and sometimes it's expensive. So we cannot open this to every job seekers in the country. So therefore, we can imagine a system that learns from large data sets of annotated CVs or data sets of videos for what it concerns interview app. What are the points that could be improved? And so such system could also flag sections of the CV or parts of the video for interviews that might require additional information or missing keywords that might be required to specify according to the job description. So one of the advantages of this kind of automated feedback is that it could be delivered almost instantly to the user. One possible alternative to automation and machine learning approaches could be crowdsourcing the reviewers, right? But however, our participants were not enthusiastic with the idea of involving peers in the review. The main reasons that they mentioned was expertise. Feedback must be trusted. If the feedback is not specific, the risk is to have multiple reviews that sometimes contradict each other. So in this sense, a feedback system that could be based on machine learning could ensure a high relevance for the feedback. This could be ensured by training the models on datasets that are specific to the occupation type that the participants is actually applying to, rather than having like a generic model. Also, a machine learning model could ensure as well to be perceived as unequivocal and authoritative, basically by the person that receives the feedback. And finally, interview app participants commented on the difficulty they faced talking to a computer. So I'm referring also to what has been already discussed in the previous presentation. This is the same kind of resistance that many people face when they record messages to an answering machine. It's kind of awkward to talk to a machine because the machine does not answer, and we have like a limited idea of whether what we are saying is actually understood by the other side. So the ideal scenario would be to talk with an expert that could ask the questions and react to the answers as we progress, and perhaps even provide the interviewee a summary of how the interview went at the end of the process. And so here I like to almost like conclude this talk with this image, a suggestive image of what this system could look like. And the user of such system would interact with a human-like agent and could ask the questions and listen to the answers. The agent could react to specific parts of the answer, asking follow-up questions. The agent could also provide like the regular non-verbal cues that occur in regular like human-to-human conversation, like nodding or making facial expression if something is unclear, right? And so it could provide these additional elements that could help the user of the system understand whether what he or she is saying is actually understood. And with this suggestion, I'd like to end the talk, and I'd like to take questions. Thank you.